If you've watched this channel for any length of time, you know I try and focus on affordable transportation, or at least transportation that I think I might be able to afford if I sold a spare kidney one day. But today we're taking a look at something very different. Because when Aston Martin calls you up and says, hey, would you mind if we threw you the keys to our brand new $250,000 sports car for 4 days? You look at your Rolodex, you grab a big eraser, erase everything on there, and you say, sure, how soon can it arrive? And that is the story behind why we are looking at this very blue 2025 Aston Martin DB12, the iconic model from the iconic British brand that is, of course, best known for Bond, James Bond. Now, the DB12 is not all new. It's heavily based on the DB11, but it has some DBX styling, the new Aston Martin logo that we're going to see across the lineup, and it is the first one of these in a long time, the first DB since 1999 to not have a V12 under the hood, despite 12 being in the model number. As we look around this DB12, you may notice it's not the cleanest car out there. That's because it was raining earlier this week, and when I saw the window sticker, which we're going to look at now, I got a little frightened about washing it myself. So I decided to leave that to the professionals, because this one has a paint job that is a $21,600 option. And that's how this got from $245,000 base MSRP up to, as equipped, $325,000. But this one also has a Bowers & Wilkins audio system for $10,000, carbon ceramic brakes for $14,400, those brake calipers painted bronze for an extra $1,900. Why that's not included in the carbon ceramics, I don't know. Some sort of brushed aluminum finisher, $1,800. Again, this paint job over $21,000. The dark chrome jewelry pack 2600 contrast stitching, which does not look overly contrasty to me inside, that's $2,900. But at least the leather dashboard is a relatively affordable $1,500 option. Definitely check that option box. The interior color scheme, though, that's expensive, $13,700, $1,400 for tinted taillights, and finally a cool $4,400 for the multi-spoke 21-inch forged wheels. And bearing in mind that Aston Martin owners are going to have lots of cars in their garage, this little sticker was even in the glove box. This is an offer for the delivery pack or handover pack, which has a battery tender, tailored car cover, and Aston Martin license plate frame. I suspect everybody's probably going to go ahead and get that one because the average Aston Martin is hanging out in a garage with a ton of other vehicles that drivers drive all the time. And this, in its native environment, might get driven once a month. And that's why in some ways I think of the DB12 as an expensive suit. Sure, there are some people that wear a suit every day, but most people have a number of suits to choose from, and they're simply picking one out of the closet as they go. Now, style-wise, the DB12 is differentiated from the DB11. It does share some structure with the DB11, but a lot of it has been changed. So things like the suspension, the track, the chassis stiffness, etc., all of that has been augmented. And then, of course, we get the new looks on the outside with a little bit of DBX style, the new Aston Martin logo there, of course, and these big LED headlights. Lots of luxury cars have big, hungry grills, but fortunately the one on the Aston Martin I think fits the design ethos better because the Aston Martin grille has always been on the large side and on the hungry side of things. Here, of course, it's quite sensible because we have nearly 700 horsepower under the hood. Since the engine's the next logical thing to talk about, I'm going to pop open the passenger door because way under here is where we find the hood release, even in left-hand drive countries. Despite the number 12 being emblazoned on the engine cover, this is not a rebirth of the Aston Martin V12. This is a 4-liter twin-turbo V8 from AMG, Mercedes-AMG, specifically the M177 4-liter twin-turbo V8, the same engine that's used in the Aston Martin DBX. It's a hot V configuration, so the turbos are right here in the center line of the engine, not off on each side. That reduces turbo lag, and of course it helps reduce the packaging requirements for the engine, making it a little bit narrower and better able to fit under a hood like this. That's why we find this cooling duct in the hood. It takes cool air from up front and then forces it right there on top of the turbos to keep everything cool. Then we have some other air vents right here in the hood that are functional to help relieve pressure and, of course, heat from under the engine compartment. Now, different than the DBX, which again uses the same engine, this does not get the Mercedes 9-speed automatic transmission. Instead, they paired this with a different German automatic. This uses a ZF8 HP75, one of my favorite transmissions out there, and a transmission that's used in a lot of high-performance luxury vehicles. I've long suspected that the best pairing for an AMG engine is a ZF transmission, and now we have empirical proof of that. In the back, we have a torque vectoring and limited slip electronically controlled axle, but we don't have all-wheel drive, and that's one thing that could probably make this a little bit quicker 0 to 60, and we do find that in some of the competition. According to Aston, this can go 0 to 60 in 3.6 seconds with a top speed of 202 miles an hour, but it is traction limited. With just rear-wheel drive, even though we have big meaty tires back there, especially if the road surface is less than perfect, you're going to spend a lot of time with those rear wheels either slipping or a lot of time with the traction control trying to make sure you don't go sideways. On the other hand, the purity of rear-wheel drive and especially that torque vectoring axle gives this a very different personality than any of the all-wheel drive competition. And if you want all-wheel drive, there is of course that DBX, there's a 911, there are a bunch of different options with all-wheel drive you can get out there. Now at 186 inches long, this is a 2+2 coupe, kind of like some of the competition, but it is notably longer than that 911 I just mentioned. So even though the back seats aren't the most useful, yes, I will try and climb into one, they are definitely bigger and more comfortable than what we find in the Porsche. The design also, I think, is fantastic. It has that classic, really big haunch in the back. They've improved the track width in this model versus the DB11, and that's really noticeable. We have 325 width tires back here, so really wide tires, really huge fender flares, a lot of styling going on. What kind of looks like a floating roofline is a floating roofline, I guess, but it also is a functional air vent. This is part of the aerodynamics package because they wanted to give this a sleek, slippery profile without an enormous spoiler in the back. They wanted that classic Aston Martin aesthetic. Now, it does have a spoiler that pops up, but at most speeds, it doesn't need one because what's happening is air comes in these ducts right here in the side, and then it comes out of this specially located slot grill style thing right back here behind the rear window. And that has the effect of acting like a spoiler at many speeds. The airblade system comes at the expense of a little bit of cargo practicality. You can see these ducts on either side of the trunk lid. Those mate to ducts inside the trunk lid, and then this grill right here. That stretches almost all the way across the trunk lid, and again, there is an additional spoiler right there that will pop out if it's needed. Up front, we also have functional aero ducts. These help relieve pressure in the front wheel wells, but as you can see in this particular area, we are getting some sand kicked up by those wheels and into that duct area. Here's a better look at the front brakes. Again, the bronze calipers and the carbon ceramic brakes are optional. Aston says this is the first time one of their core models has received carbon ceramic brakes, as opposed to their high-performance models, which have had it in the past. These wheels, they're also optional. On the other hand, Aston gives us standard swan opening doors. These are not aggressive gull wing doors like we find in some, so I find them a little bit less pretentious, a little bit more discreet, and still fully functional. You see, the DB12 is really, really low, and if there's one thing I've been frightened of this week, it's parallel parking and perpendicular parking, because the front end is really low, and those huge expensive wheels are really close to the edge of the rubber. And this just helps alleviate one of those parallel parking concerns, which is finding yourself in the city, opening your door, and discovering that the curb is just a little too high. Here, it actually does lift a reasonable amount out of the way. This is probably the angle where the DB12 looks its best because the huge tires in the back are really obvious. We also have the big dual exhaust tips here, metal underbody cladding because of course the exhaust is back there and they need to cool those exhaust tips. Full LED taillights, although the turn signals, because of their size and how slim they are not amber in North America. Also, in North America, we get these weird little bumps here. They kind of remind me of, a Madonna video from the 1980s there. That's because of Aston Martin's interpretation of bumper laws in North America. I suspect, however, you could easily swap in a European bumper if you wanted to delete those. And if you can afford a $320,000 car, I would say it would be a sin if you did not immediately run out and get the European bumper and just delete those silly bumps because they look terrible. While we're back here, we should talk about the trunk, which surprised me by not having a powered lid, something I would definitely have expected to see in a vehicle with this price tag. The cargo area is quite small. This scores a 1 in our 24-inch roller bag test, and 22-inch roller bags like this will just barely fit if you are very, very careful. On a longer weekend trip away for a party of 2, you could pack very lightly and have it still work. If you're wondering about a spare tire, nope, we don't find one of those because the average Aston Martin owner probably has people for that. On the inside, some of the controls have been borrowed from the DBX, and there is a little bit of Mercedes here and there. So we find the same sort of powered steering column control that we find in Mercedes AMG models, and the same windshield wiper stock as well. The steering wheel, that is definitely very Aston Martin, but as you'll see in a moment, there are a few things that definitely remind me a little bit of the Mercedes lineup. We also get some light controls over here for the headlights that are definitely quite Mercedes-like. The seat controls, they're over here in the center console. It is an interesting placement. I'm not sure if it's the easiest to use. I'll show you those in a second. We have a toggle that toggles between the bolsters and the four-way adjustable lumbar support. There's a 3-position memory, but we don't have as much adjustability in this seat as you might expect for $300,000. We don't have an extending thigh cushion. We don't have an adjustable head restraint at all. And I do wish that we had just a little bit more control over the shape of the seat, because for taller people or shorter people, they might not find a comfortable position. Although for me at 6 feet tall, this is actually pretty reasonable. The steering wheel, interestingly, is also not heated in this model. Now, according to Aston, this is technically a 2+2 coupe. So let's check out the +2 in the back, keeping your expectations quite low, of course. We get a power first seat here, first row seat, that slowly motors back into position. I attempted to do this for a quick lunch away at the office. It didn't go quite to plan. However, these seats are more comfortable than the ones we find in the 911. Not any taller, though. As you can see, you'd have to be pretty darn short to sit back here. For purses, small bags, this is a great area. I mean, your purse, your bag, your leather satchel, your laptop bag, they're never going to feel quite as special as this leather cocoon in the back. But we have this big hump here, of course, for the driveline, portions of the transmission, etc., with a big subwoofer right there in the middle, shoulder belts that come out of the center off to the side. Lovely leather stitch ceiling, just not a lot of headroom. I am kind of surprised that they didn't find a way to slam these seats a little bit closer to the ground to make more use of this space. If you really had a short-legged person up front, maybe they would be able to fit there. And thankfully, this seat does stop if you try and motor it backwards, so it will let you actually squeeze someone in the back. It's just not going to be comfortable. Now, if you're thinking about child seat fitment, I would say caution parents that have kids in booster seats that are taller, because you may actually start hitting your head before you're out of a booster seat, and you probably would need to amputate their legs in order for them to actually fit back here. Just in case you're wondering, that's what the legroom looks like. Let's take a look around the inside and see what $300,000 buys you and doesn't buy you. Up here we have some speakers for the optional Bowers & Wilkins audio system. Again, quite an expensive option. We have an auto-dimming rearview mirror with the home link controls right there, some buttons for the telematics system. Lots of leather coating absolutely every surface in here. We have a leather stitched ceiling, leather doors, leather seats, etc., even leather wrapped sun visors here. But these, oddly enough, don't extend, and they don't even swing to the side. They are just fixed in place right there. But we do have a slide to the side little door for the vanity mirror, which oddly enough has no illumination at all. Now up here on the ceiling, again, lots of leather, lots of stitching. We have an Alcantara surround right there helping dress things up even more. And that leather work continues all the way to the back end of the vehicle, really giving this a very elegant and very different look than the average luxury car. Up here we have the new Aston Martin logo, of course, embroidered on the head restraint, and a one-piece seat design with that head restraint integrated into the back. The seats are actually identical, left and right, and that's why we have this odd little blob over here on this side. You'll find it on the inboard side of the driver's seat as well. That's because the little pull cord for getting back into the rear, it would be mounted there if that seat was over here on the driver's side. Here's a better look at those rear seats, really quite tight as you can see, but we have that subwoofer right there in the middle. You'd really need to be legless in one way or another in order to actually fit back there. Now moving over to the seats, we have that same stitching pattern that we found up on the ceiling. Pretty aggressive bolsters for the driver and front passenger on the seat back and seat bottom cushion. Those are adjustable, of course, but no thigh cushion extension, no seat massage, nothing like that is going on. These seats are not as adjustable as a lot of mainline luxury options. Moving over to the front doors, everything is coated in leather, including the sills down there you can see, and that's why we have that little sill strip right there to help improve durability, but you're still going to be rubbing on that leather as you get in and out of the vehicle. No vehicle seems to be immune from the scourge of shiny black plastic, and we do find quite a lot in here, surprisingly. This entire surround on the front doors is shiny black plastic, and it is already showing signs of wear inside this cabin. Moving up to the dashboard, we have that optional stitched leather upper dashboard. This is where we finally find the contrasting stitching inside, although it's not overly contrasty. The air vents in the dash open and close with the twist of that little knob right there. On this side, we find a somewhat small glove compartment. That's the button to open it. I wasn't able to fit a tablet computer inside. It is definitely on the small side, but everything down here is leather wrapped, including this little storage cubby right there between the driver and front passenger seats. Now, speaking of the seats, here's what the control looks like if I can get the camera around here. So we find the seat control for the bottom of the seat cushion, the seat back cushion right there, and then this little knob over here selects what this four-way joystick will do, whether it's bolsters or whether it's lumbar, and then we have the memory buttons on top. Back to the center console, we find the new infotainment software that we're going to see in other Aston Martin models. It supposedly offers wireless CarPlay and Android Auto, but try as hard as we might, we could not get it to connect to any phone in the office. iPhone, Android phone, regardless of version, etc. We just could not get it to connect. So we ended up using Bluetooth while we had the vehicle. Up here on the top of the dash, we have the center channel speaker for the Bowers & Wilkins audio system. Again, that's a pretty expensive option. Now, generally speaking, this software is pretty intuitive to use, but it is a little on the sluggish side, and there are some quirks. For instance, every time you get in the vehicle, you're probably going to want to press this little button down here to get you over to the assistant settings, because it goes back to full assistance every single time. So if you don't want the lane departure warning, lane departure monitoring, etc. system on, you have to disable that every single power cycle. Down here we have controls for the dual zone automatic climate control with the temperature knobs down here lower, fan control there, volume over there. This is the drive mode selector. We do have a GT drive mode, which is your base drive mode. There's also an individual mode, Sport and Sport Plus. Individual is going to be the one where you can actually adjust things. Wet is going to be the mode you're definitely going to want to use in wet weather because there's a lot of power and it definitely can get a little squirrely thanks to the two-wheel drive nature here. Stability and traction control off button, a button for the active exhaust, 3 levels for the suspension. Again, those are adjustable via the individual drive mode, a button to disable the auto start-stop system as well. On this side, we have a button for the 360-degree camera system, but it does take a little while to load. There is a 3D option so you can drag the vehicle around the screen and see exactly what's going on from an outside perspective, which is kind of cool. Now back here in the center console, we find 2 somewhat small cup holders. In case you're wondering, that's what the key looks like right there with Aston Martin on the side of it. This one has a shiny black plastic cover that extends out there like that to cover the cup holders, but they are definitely on the small side. Back here, we find more of that stitched leather work and a storage cubby that opens to reveal a fairly shallow storage area. Remember, rear-wheel drive and of course very low. We have a 12-volt power port there and 2 USB-C interface ports. Moving over to the driver's side, we do not find a head-up display, oddly enough, but we do find a full-color LCD instrument cluster. And the theme is selectable. We control it via this BlackBerry-style knob over here on the steering wheel. Definitely very Mercedes-like in that operation. And as you can see, we have a bunch of different views you can choose from as far as the content, and then you can choose from 2 different layouts, basically 2 knobs, or, sorry, 2 dials, I should say, or a single dial look with 2 displays on either side. For some reason this morning, the check engine light turned on, but I'm not exactly clear what's going on with that. Now down here on the steering wheel, we have a fingerprint sensor, controls for the adaptive cruise control, the speed limiter there, leather-wrapped airbag cover, of course, those controls I showed you earlier, with a track forward button, something I really appreciate because a lot of sports cars, for some reason, especially a lot of high-end luxury vehicles, don't have a track forward button, which always strikes me as a strange choice. Paddle shifters on the back of the steering wheel, those move with the wheel itself. And then over here you can see a few Mercedes parts. For instance, this turn signal and windshield wiper stock, that's definitely a Mercedes part, as is the tilt telescoping control for the steering wheel itself. And then of course, the light switches down there for the headlights. I think one of the first things you're going to notice about the DB12 out on the road is this interesting combination of a Mercedes engine and a ZF 8-speed automatic transmission. I have honestly long said that I don't care for Mercedes transmissions as much as some people do, and I think this is a fantastic pairing because AMG makes some truly exceptional engines, and I always suspected that they would be better if they were paired with a ZF automatic transmission. And now I can safely say we know that for sure. It's the gear changes, it's the ratios involved, everything I think is just better suited to this DB12 with this particular combination. Now, the ZF 8-speed automatic transmission, especially in the more heavy-duty formats like this, sometimes the shifts can be a bit rough. And on this road, you definitely have to be careful because 671 horsepower and just 2-wheel drive can definitely be a big handful, especially with the torque vectoring axle in the back, which gives this a very distinctive feel when you start pressing the pedal a little bit harder in these corners here. And there is a lot of grip going on, but things are also a little twitchy. Now, Maybe I should talk about that after we talk about the numbers though, because this is definitely quicker than Aston Martin says it is. This one went 0 to 60 in 3.4 seconds. That was the best time we got. This is traction limited because, again, just two-wheel drive. So the average of our 0 to 60 runs was about 3.5 seconds because it is pretty tricky to get a good launch. This is the kind of vehicle where I think we have about hit the limit of two-wheel drive. Yes, there are more powerful vehicles out there that just power the back wheels. Obviously, there were some Hellcats and Demons, etc., but they weren't any better at applying power to the back end. If you want to go quicker 0 to 60, you're going to need to go for an all-wheel drive option, or of course, an electric option. As far as stopping distance goes, this one managed the task in 98 feet from 60 miles an hour. That is a fantastic score, and the brake pedal feel is really good for a vehicle with carbon ceramic brakes. Now, thanks to the carbon ceramics, the repeatability of that braking is going to be very, very good. And a lot of vehicles with carbon ceramics, there's compromises elsewhere. They just don't feel quite right. Sometimes they can feel a little bit grabby. They can also be noisier than average. These are very civilized. And honestly, behind the wheel, behind the pedals, you'd be hard-pressed to know that this has the ceramic brakes until you're really romping on them all day long and you're noticing that there's a lot less fade going on. Some of this is possible thanks to the lighter curb weight that we find in the DB12. Now, admittedly, light is relative. This is 3,715 pounds approximately in the base format of the coupe. This is probably a little bit heavier than that. The convertible's right around 3,900 pounds. Any way you slice it though, that's a pretty respectable curb weight for something with nearly 700 horsepower. The combination of the electronic differential in the back and the quick steering make this feel a little bit twitchy out on a road like this. It does take a lot of getting used to really get the most out of the DB12. It honestly took me several days to really get used to this particular combination because the feel is just a little unusual here and there. Not unusual bad, because the levels of grip are astonishing, and this is not video game-like many vehicles that I guess you could cross-shop against this. Part of this probably has to do with the fact that this is not a perfectly balanced front-rear weight-biased car. Instead, it actually has a little bit more weight in the rear. So it's about 52% in the rear, 48% up front, something like that. Not as heavily rear biased as a 911, and that's obvious because this doesn't feel like it's plodding against you in the corners. It doesn't feel like it's going to spin out or anything, but it makes the front end feel a little bit lighter, a little bit more willing to turn in. And then of course we get just massive grip from those huge tires in the back. This is an awful lot of fun. But the quickness of the steering and that E-diff mean that on some of these corners, you might find yourself not really needing to steer as much as you want to. So you kind of end up ping-ponging a little bit until you really get used to the way the steering feels. Handling, I'm absolutely going to give an A here. This has a fantastic feel, and I do prefer vehicles that have just a slight rear weight bias to vehicles with a strong rear weight bias. So personally, I would take this over some mid-engine vehicles or of course a 911. That's just my personal preference. I know a lot of people really love that rear weight bias in the 911. Don't get me wrong, it is fun. This is just my personal preference. Now, on the ride side of things, I'm in the GT mode, which is the softest suspension mode. We have this big clicky dial here in the middle. If I move it over to Sport or Sport Plus, it gets really quite firm. And for me, I think honestly a little bit too firm, because something like a Bentley Continental GT, it's not exactly going to be soft in all of its drive modes, but it is going to be more comfortable than the model that I'm driving here. And I'm talking about a $300,000 sports coupe. The general expectation is that for these high-end sports coupes, that if they don't have a Ferrari or Lamborghini logo on them, you want something a bit more comfortable. And I have to be honest, that was my expectation as well. I had expected something that rode a bit more like the DBX. Yeah, that's an SUV and this is a coupe, but I just expected something similar in terms of its ride tuning. Obviously more coupe-ified than that. But if Aston Martin really wants to compete with those ultra-luxury sports cars, those hypercars, supercars, etc., then this is kind of the ride tuning they need. It's just not what I have classically associated with Aston Martin. They've generally been a little bit more comfortable than this DB12. Personal preference there again. More definite though, and more empirical, is the cabin noise score at 50 miles an hour. I measured 69.9 decibels in here at 50 miles an hour, and that is on our new test scale because we have some new equipment and of course we have a repaved road that we're measuring everything on. Unfortunately, as I've said in previous videos, the road that we usually use got repaved. This was an opportunity for us to actually go back and make sure everybody's using the same equipment. Comparisons are a little bit tricky because we don't have the complete array of vehicles tested on the new road surface yet, but this is a little bit louder in terms of road noise and wind noise than I might like. Of course, we do have those really wide tires on the back, and they're not very far from me, so certainly keep that part in mind. Obviously, if you got the convertible version, it would be a little bit louder inside as well. Now, on the subject of the noise, as much as I love the AMG 4-liter V8, and for people that constantly question here, that is a yield sign, not a stop sign, it sounds fantastic, but it doesn't sound quite as fantastic as a classic Aston naturally aspirated engine, and that's simply because we have the turbochargers in the way. This is a twin-turbo V8, and rather unfortunately, turbochargers tend to affect the exhaust note of a vehicle more than a supercharger because you have that turbine in the way. On the other hand, without the turbochargers, we'd be talking about a really high revving engine in order to get 671 horsepower or massive displacement. And I don't think either of those would fit the personality of this vehicle right. A heavier, bigger engine would obviously put a lot of weight up front. It would make this handle and feel very different out on the road. And a high revving engine, I've just never been that big of a fan. I'd prefer low-end grunt for daily drivability and for fun out on winding mountain roads like this. Now, back to the transmission and some of the personality here. I love the fact that the ZF8 speed shifts really quickly and that it's still a traditional automatic transmission, not a dual clutch. Because if you're not driving this hard out on your favorite winding mountain road like this, which you definitely can, you can just pop this in drive and have a very mild-mannered vehicle with a suspension tune that's perhaps just a little on the firm side. I have a sneaking suspicion that the average Aston Martin owner is not going to care about fuel economy, but if you are interested, we've been averaging 14 miles per gallon, probably because of the way that we've been driving this over the last few days. What is of more concern, I would say, to the average Aston owner is the fact that we have sun visors that don't swing to the side. And if you're on a winding mountain road like this, whether you're in California or in the south of France, it is kind of nice to have a sun visor that either flips to the side or two of them, so that way you can keep the sun out of your eyes when you're on those winding mountain switchbacks. That is a surprise that in a vehicle that's over $300,000, not only do we not find swing to the side sun visors, which we find in a Nissan Versa, but we also don't find illuminated vanity mirrors. Two odd twists. But as I said before, there are some unusual twists about this vehicle, like the fact that I simply have not been able to get Apple CarPlay to work on the infotainment system. Also, we don't have a heated steering wheel, and just a few other little oddities here and there. We also have seats that are, again, not quite as comfortable as some of the competition. But style-wise, I think Aston Martin knocked it out of the park, because this simply gets far more looks than a 911. 911s are, a little on the common side, if I'm honest, in the Bay Area. We definitely see a lot of high net worth people driving around 911s. You don't see many Aston Martins out on the road. And to be honest, that is what this kind of vehicle is all about. Long story short, the DB12 is all kinds of fantastic, but it's not without its flaws. Now, for me, some of those flaws make it a little charming. Some of them kind of bug me. The biggest flaw, I would say, for me is the lack of functioning CarPlay, although I assume a visit to a dealer would probably solve that with maybe a software update, something along those lines. But there are some fundamental flaws, I guess you could say, like those sun visors that don't even flip over to the side. That really irked me more than I thought it should, probably because of the price of the vehicle. Now, in a convertible, that's a little bit more common, but in a coupe, really, it's just one part away from those being able to swivel over to the side. What's interesting for me, though, about the Aston is that it has a unique personality, and more personality than most of the competition. Because when we take a look at a Rolls-Royce, it has a lot of BMW personality. When we take a look at a Bentley, there's a lot of Audi and Volkswagen going on. When we take a look at a Porsche, there's still a reasonable amount of Audi and Volkswagen going on there as well. Ferrari, there's still actually quite a lot of Fiat, Chrysler, and Stellantis, even though it is no longer part of a larger conglomerate. Same thing for the Maserati, same thing for insert practically every other option in this segment here. When we're talking about this or a select number of small, independent performance luxury car companies out there, and that number is getting smaller every year, the personality is just part of the equation, and that's what's interesting for me. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comments section below, and if you suddenly decided to sell both of your kidneys and get yourself a sports coupe like this, would you be interested in this, something like the Bentley Continental GT, which I do think is fantastic as well, or would you get something else entirely? I have to admit that my rational side of my brain, as rational as we can be talking when we're talking about $300,000 worth of car, which is again more than my home cost, I think I might go for something like a Bentley, because there is a benefit to that corporate daddy arrangement where the infotainment systems are more fully thought out. There's more of a software engineering team involved there, more time for the software to be fully baked. Whereas smaller independent companies like this tend to have user interface software that's a little bit behind the times. On the other hand, if I was after the ultimate in personality, I think this has far more than any of the vehicles we've driven lately, other than perhaps something like that Ferrari Roma. Let me know what you think about that. But now Ferrari is going to have the same kind of small company on their own situations and problems that maybe we see out of Aston Martin. So don't expect that software to really be any more fully baked inside the Roma. See all of you later.